Okay, so when I tell my story, I just like to start right at the beginning. My dad never was around. He was an everyday drinker and drug user. And so when my mom had me, she was really young. So we never moved out of the house with my grandparents. And so she stayed there, and I can remember this house that I grew up in, there was always like a lot of people. I can remember sometimes counting 14, 15 people, 16 people laying in this house at night when we went to sleep. So on top of this, kind of chaotic childhood and, with all, very busy and with all these people around, there was some sexual abuse in my past, and it was by another man. And that happened from about the time that I was 6 to 12 years old. And I kind of got the courage up to tell. He only ended up getting like 6 months out of the whole ordeal of jail. I just remember thinking like, this wasn't even worth it. I felt a major sense of injustice. When my friend came up with the idea to buy a bottle of liquor at the end of the week, and we got the bottle, and he took a big swig, and I took a big swig, and he took a big swig, and I took a big swig, and we just drank that bottle down till it was gone. And I remember throwing up and getting the dry heaves and waking up, even the next morning, still feeling really terrible, thinking, man, I can't wait to do that again. All through the rest of like middle school and on up into high school, I wasn't really worse than anybody else. But then about the time that I was a senior in high school, I came home and my mom had a couple prescriptions, and I just had asked her, what are you gonna do with those? She said, I don't really know. And I said, well, I can help you sell these to my friends. You can just save me 10 out of each prescription. And the math just made sense, and that's what we did. I remember that's when I knew I had crossed the line, and that I was an everyday drug user at that point. Somewhere around that time, my uncle had introduced me to smoking crack. At this point, I'm like in my mid-20s, and I'm unemployable, and now I'd gone down a road that it was too far down that I didn't know how to get out of. What had happened was I turned to stealing. And so, one night I was out, I walked a few doors down to the neighbor's house, and I got in their garage and I stole their little kid's dirt bike, walked it next to me through the yard. Finally, eventually they caught up with me, and they threw me in jail. I caught 2 felonies over that, a felony breaking and entering and a grand theft. I knew that using drugs and alcohol was a direct result of me being in jail. It was nothing else. While I have been extremely bad, I have been extremely good also. And one of those times while I was being extremely good in church, I snagged myself one of the best girls that you could ever get. And I was sitting in jail, and she had just bought a brand new house. By this time, we had had my first son. And all I had to do was not get high, work any job, any menial job, and I could go and live a better life. And I got out of jail on that 90th day, and I don't know what it was. It was something stronger than what I could control came over me. And I remember in that intake, sitting there putting my own clothes back on, the thought hit me, it's on. And within hours, I was right back doing the same thing that I was doing before. I was on adult felony probation at that point, and I had to get a urinalysis every week. I ended up failing 7 of those drug tests, and I'm back in front of the judge. He is not happy, and my probation officer, who I thought hated me, did something unbelievable, and she said, "Judge, I don't think that he needs prison. I think he's an addict and that he needs treatment." And the judge says, hesitantly, "I'll take your word for it. You know him better than I do." And he sentenced me to do an IOP. And it's the kind of thing where you go, 3 nights a week, 3 hours a night, you sit around in little groups and you talk about your feelings. And so I ended up graduating that IOP. And believe this or not, I strung together 3 years of complete abstinence. It was great. We planned and had our second kid And it really was like the American dream. And I had gotten a little injury at work, no big deal. I got insurance now, and so I go get that injury fixed. On the way out the door, they hand me a script of Vicodin, and I get home and I'm sitting there reading, take 1 to 2 every 4 to 6 hours. And so I took one, and I was still stinging. I took another. Gave it 8 or 9 more minutes and I was still hurting. And I took that third one, and at 3 Vicodins in, started what I like to call a 2-year, very well managed relapse. At the end of that 2 years, my wife had caught me smoking crack and kicked me out of the house. Basically, everything that I had worked for those 3 years was gone. The house, the wife, the job, the kids in the car were all gone. And I was still using. I was still going hard, and I still didn't care. I was getting high in this parking lot one night, and my 5-year-old son, who had never known me not to be around, I was always there, called me, and he's crying into the phone, and he says, "Dad," he says, "I need you to come home, and I need you to read me a bedtime story. I'm scared, and I'm not gonna be able to go to sleep unless you come here." And I was on that phone, and I couldn't do it. I wasn't allowed to do it, and if I'm really being honest, I didn't want to do it. And I can remember treating him coldly, and I hung up that phone. And you could easily describe that moment as my lowest moment. I had never been more full of self-hate. I had never felt like a bigger failure. I had never been more miserable in my life. And I thank God for that moment every single day, because that's the moment that I went from really wanting to be sober. And I really did want to be sober. But that's the moment that I went from really wanting to be sober to being willing to do what it took to get sober. I was able to get myself into treatment, and I walk into this place, and the guy shakes my hand, and he says, "Welcome, you just bought a $40,000 big book." And that's the book they use at the meetings. That's the book that they use at those meetings that I hated so bad. And all throughout my life, I had kind of developed this resentment towards church, towards God. I kind of had this feeling like, God had abandoned me. Why did my childhood have to be so hard and so uncomfortable? Why was I so angry? Why couldn't I get any relief? Why? I really had blamed God my whole life for that. When they told me that the key to getting sober was going to be that I find a relationship with God, you can imagine how disappointing that was for me, because I really wanted the answer to getting sober to be, well, you're just going to have to work it out in therapy, or we'll find you the right combination of medicine, or you can get on a strict diet, and you can do this. And I really wanted there to be another way to get sober, and there just wasn't. I guess that I was hurting bad enough and in such a bad enough position that I was just open to the things that had been suggested to me. And I began to realize along this journey that God wanted to heal me through a process, not an event. Once I would humble myself to do the thing that He was putting in my life for me to go and do, then I could experience the healing. Once I did submit, my life's really turned around. I can sit around and I could tell you about, my house, my wife, my job, my kids, my car, and I have all those things today, and they're fantastic, and God has really blessed me in those areas. But by being willing to submit myself to the process that God had before me, I'm comfortable in my own skin. And I don't know that I've ever been comfortable in my own skin. I can remember being uncomfortable since I was a little kid, since I was 5 years old. And by being willing to go through, this hard process, I'm in relationship with God. I'm going to a church that I love. I was just so resentful at God, church, and church people that I didn't know that I would ever recover from that, let alone the drugs and the alcohol. But I can sit here today and tell you that I have. And so that's my story.